The late 20th century marked a pivotal era in political systems globally, categorized by the widespread decline of authoritarian regimes and the growing dominance of democratic ideals. As noted by scholar Robert Dale, during this period many traditional and modern alternatives to democracy, including monarchies, aristocracies, and totalitarian regimes such as communism, fascism, and Nazism, either lost legitimacy, collapsed, or forced into obscurity. This transformation reflects what Robert Dale describes as an extraordinary and unprecedented political change, signaling a significant shift in the global acceptance of democratic governance. So has democracy finally dominated in the struggle for global support? Hardly. Some observers believe that democracy is in crisis, or at the very least severely strained, even in nations where it had been established and appeared secure. This is due to a decline in citizens' confidence in the ability of the elected leaders, political parties, and government officials to deal fairly or successfully with the issues such as poverty, crime, corruption, and so on. This view, approached in a particular manner, is in agreement with the statement made by Winston Churchill. The minimal definition of democracy suggests that such a regime has at least the following: universal adult suffrage, recurring free, competitive, and fair elections, more than one political party, and more than one source of information. Democracy is a political system where the power is placed in the hands of the people, who govern either directly or by way of freely electing representatives. In Greek, it could be translated to rule by the people, and it is founded on the basis of fundamental rights and liberties, rule of law, political equality, and the participation in the affairs of the state. The most common display of modern democracy is the electoral system that a nation adopts. An electoral system is a method by which votes are translated into seats in the legislature or positions in government. Electoral systems determine how representatives are chosen, how votes are counted, and how political power is distributed. Electoral systems play a critical role in shaping the nature of political competition, the representation of minority groups, and the stability of democratic institutions. The choice of system can significantly influence governance, party dynamics, and voter engagement. This brings us to the second most common electoral system, first-past-the-post system, used in the UK and the majority of Commonwealth countries. In this presentation, we shall look to examine the first-past-the-post system as being a simple system that has some benefits but lacks in other areas, and how it has led to some requests for reform and different implementations in Commonwealth countries in comparison.
My name is Elena, and I'll be doing some explanation on the first-past-the-post system. So, the first-past-the-post system, also known as the simple majority system of plurality voting, is one of the simplest forms of voting that is used in the United Kingdom, electing representatives to the legislative bodies. So, in the system, regardless of whether a candidate receives more than half of the votes, the one that has the most votes still wins. Essentially, in the past, there were medieval electoral methods of selecting local knights and burgesses, which is also known as town representatives, to serve in the parliament. This gave rise to the system of the first-past-the-post system. This early technique of choosing representative for the legislature operates on the straightforward principle that the first person to receive a majority of votes wins. The practice of using a simple majority to choose one of the candidates per region had become more standardized by 15th century. So in the past 20 years, the UK has twice supported electoral reforms. The first one was in 1997 when the Labour Party did so, and in 2011 when the Conservative Liberal Democratic Coalition did so. There was even a popular referendum on the latter. However, the electoral reform was unsuccessful twice, in 2011 because it was overwhelmingly rejected, and in 1997 it remained a proportion. So the first-past-the-post system is currently the most widely used system in the UK as a result. Early elections were frequently unofficial and only open to a selected few voters. With the establishment of the Reform Acts, the UK voting system became more structured and standardized. The Representation of the People Act 1832 increased the franchise by 50%, and by 1948, full franchise was introduced based on the equality by the idea of one person, one vote. Throughout the development of the UK electoral system, where constituencies were reformed and electorates were expanded, MPs were still elected using the first past the post system, since it offered a simple and transparent way to choose winners in a single member constituencies. It became one of the standard voting procedure for general elections to the House of Commons. So now let's talk a little bit about how it works in the UK Parliament and local elections. So in the UK, both parliamentary and numerous local elections are conducted using the same electoral system, which is the first past the post system. Each of the 650 parliament constituencies in the UK elects one member of the parliament to the House of Commons during elections. So the candidate who receives the most amount of vote in the constituency wins, even if they do not obtain an absolute majority. Each voter casts a single vote for the candidate of their choice. The invitation to form a government is extended to the political party that obtains a majority vote, which is 326 or more. So the first past the post system frequently used in local elections in Wales and England. Voters only cast one ballot in single member wards, and the winner is the candidate who received the most amount of votes. Voters may as well cast more than one ballot in a multiple member ward, one for each seat that is up for grabs, and the candidate who receives the most votes are elected. However, although all of this, other regions in the UK also employ different systems. For example, the single transferable vote system is employed in Scotland and Northern Ireland for local elections.
Hi, my name is Zoe Wong, and today I'll be talking about the strength of the first past the post system. An initial strength of the first past the post system is the simplicity of the system. Through the system, voters simply have to mark the ballot paper with an X next to their preferred candidate. This voting system is not a matter of law but of past political practice. Unlike the alternative voting system and the supplementary vote, it does not emphasize the need to rank professions or to understand the complexities of transferable votes, such as that of the AVS. Thus, the simplicity of the system contributes to an easier understanding, particularly for voters such as young adults, elders, and even the disabled. This in turn leads to a higher participation rate in regards to a country's political election. In the same way, the outcome of the first past the post system is typically straightforward and easier to interpret. Additionally, political elections incorporating the first past the post system tend to produce clear and decisive outcomes in a quicker manner. As the outcome is determined by counting the number of votes for each party, the candidate who gains the largest number of votes in the election wins the seats, thus speeding up the process of declaring, counting, and organizing votes for each political party. This helps to maintain political stability and increase public confidence in the electoral process. In countries where political elections stir up conflict and tensions, such as that of Kenya, Nigeria, and even Myanmar, having fast results strengthens the country's confidence. With reference to Blaise and Carty's study in 1988 on the effectiveness of the plurality rule, the study explores whether one of the first past the post professed goal, which is creativity of strong one-party government, is actually achieved. Using comparative data, the authors show that the first past the post constantly result in manufactured majority. Even when the popular vote is split, this illustrates how well the first past the post promotes governance stability. Moreover, the first past the post system tends to create a more concrete connection between the elected officials and their local representatives. Even MPs or elected officials represent a certain area, which makes it easier for people to confide in them. This makes representatives more accountable, as they have to deal with their constituency's problem if they want to be re-elected after their 5-year tenure. On the other hand, proportional system often weaken this connection by giving more than one representative to bigger areas. First past the poll makes sure that local voices do not go unheard when decisions are made on a national level. Furthermore, the first past the poll is often known for creating strong government with only one party. This is because a party can form a government even if it gets less than 50% of the national vote, if it wins the most constituency. On the other hand, many have argued that this is unfair to smaller parties. It is stated that it does not help maintain stability. Governments that are strong can pass laws and put policies into place more easily than those with a smaller constituency. For instance, the first past the post system in the UK has historically allowed for majority governments that can serve a full term without having to hold elections or get stuck in political deadlock. For this reason, the first past the poll system tends to favor bigger, more mainstream political parties and make it harder for fringe or extremist groups to get seats. Candidates have to deal to a lot of different voters because they need a lot of votes to win constituency. This stops parties from running divisive or extreme campaigns and instead encourage moderations and build coalitions. First past the poll can help limit the power of divisive political groups and promote more inclusive platforms in countries like Malaysia that have many ethnic and religious groups and where national unity is very important. Finally, when evaluating the first past the post system from a practical standpoint, one can argue that it is reasonably simple to administer this electoral system as it is more cost-effective compared to others. With the system, multiple voting rounds and intricate computations are not required of the electoral commissions. This ease of use guarantees more efficient election administering and saves public funds for developing countries. It also makes it less likely that there will be dispute and legal challenge because the results are easier to check and less open to interpretation.
Alright, now I'm going to talk about the weaknesses of the first past the post system. First, and the most obvious one, is the disproportional and unfair representation. The electoral system has certain disadvantages of disproportionality. The election should be fair, and by fair it means that if you have approximately 10% of votes, you should have only 10% of seats in the parliament, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Farage said that the first past the post system was unfair after Reform took 14.3% of the popular vote, making it the third biggest party by vote share, but only won 5 seats in the parliament. The Green Party received 6.8% of votes for it, but only have 4 seats in the parliament. Besides that, during the general election of the UK in 2015, the Conservatives gained 36.9% of votes, but won 330 seats in the parliament, which is approximately nearly 51% of seats in the parliament. As for the UK Independence Party, they managed to get 12.6% of votes, but only won 1 seat in the parliament, which is about 0.2% of seats in the parliament. This clearly shows that the disproportional and unfairness of representation. The situation is the same in Malaysia. During the general election in 2018, Pakatan Harapan gained 48% of votes and won 113 seats in the parliament. On the contrary, PAS gained 16.9% of votes but only won 18 seats in the parliament, which is about 8.1% of seats in parliament. These are clear cases of disproportional and unfair representations. Second, gerrymandering and safe seats. Another significant weakness is gerrymandering, which is the manipulation of electoral constituency boundaries to favor a particular party or group. Even without non-apportionment, constituency boundaries can be drawn to advantage a political party. Under first past the post system, only one candidate wins per constituency, so how the boundaries are drawn directly affects the outcome. In Malaysia, the boundaries are drawn by the Electoral Commission without the approval of the government. This was originally the case, but after the amendments made in the Federal Constitution in 1960, it needs the approval of the Parliament. Now the constituency boundaries can now also be drawn to favor a particular party or group, and this will also lead to tactical voting. Moreover, the first past the post system frequently results in tactical voting, where voters select the candidate who has the best chance of defeating a candidate they strongly oppose rather than the one they support the most. In order to avoid an undesirable outcome, voters frequently strategically vote a more valuable candidate in constituencies where their preferred party has little chance of winning. To prevent a conservative victory, A Green Party supporter might, for instance, vote for the Labour candidate. Although this might affect their local outcome, it skews the electorate's actual preferences, making it challenging to gauge the level of support for newer or smaller parties. By encouraging voters to select the lesser evil rather than to cast an honest ballot, tactical voting also serves to maintain dominance of two major parties, the Conservatives and the Labour. While undermining the fairness of democratic process, this can eventually lower political participation and deter people from casting a ballot altogether, particularly if they believe their actual opinions will never be heard in the parliament. Third will be two-party dominance. There are only little representations of smaller parties. Smaller parties have long argued that they are particularly disadvantaged under the first-past-the-post system, which they say means millions of votes are not reflected in the makeup of the House of Commons. Fourth is wasted votes. Many votes, even an overall majority in a constituency, may be wasted. Only the winner relative to the second place candidate being elected. Many of it does not contribute to the winning party. In 2015, over 22 million of votes, that's approximately 74% of votes, are classified as wasted. 2.8 million voters were likely to have voted tactically over 9% of voters. Both votes cast as losing candidates and more votes than winning candidates required to win are included in this. Practically speaking, the 10,000 votes that remain are essentially wasted if a candidate receives 25,000 votes but only needs 15,000 of votes to defeat the runner-up. All votes cast for candidates who do not win the most votes in their constituency also have no bearing on the outcome. In safe seats, where the same party routinely wins the opposition, votes are unlikely to have an impact. This is particularly prevalent. Millions of people can thus cast ballots in an election without having a bearing whatsoever on the outcome. Fifth, implements the mandate but not necessarily of the majority. In the first-past-the-post system, a party can form the government and carry out its policies even if most people didn't vote for them. This is because winning the most seats and not most votes is what matters in the first-past-the-post system. A party can win the majority of seats in the parliament with 30% to 40% of votes. This means that there are approximately 60 to 70% of voters vote against them, but the party can pass laws and make decisions that a majority voters never supported. Last of all is rise to minority rule. The fact that party may form a government despite receiving less than 50% the national vote is a significant flaw in the first-past-the-post system. This essentially establishes minority rule, where a party can secure a majority of seats in the parliament without having a majority of the public's support. For instance, the Conservative Party received roughly 43.6% of popular vote, but only 56% of seats in the House of Commons in the 2019 UK general election. Consequently, even though the majority of voters favoured other parties, they managed to establish a majority government. This calls into question the government's democratic legitimacy.
Hi, my name is Zender, and now I will be talking about first past the post in other Commonwealth nations. Several Commonwealth countries use or have historically used the first past the post electoral system. Comparing their experience reveals common patterns of disproportionality and underrepresentation, but also shows that reform is possible. The UK's continued reliance on first past the post is in many respects typical, but notable outlier like New Zealand shows that alternative system can succeed. Now I'll be talking about Canada, familiar system, familiar force. Canada continued to use the FPTP in federal and most provincial elections. Like the UK, it experienced a frequent disconnect between the nation's vote share and seat distribution. For instance, in the 2019 federal election, the Liberty Party formed a minority government despite receiving fewer votes than the Conservatives. Critics argue that FPTP in Canada distorts voter preference, limits minority representation and discourages turnout. According to Nolan Albert, in 2024, FPTP's tendency to produce forced majorities in Canada undermines the democratic principle of equal votes weight. Reform efforts like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2015 promised to end FPTP have stalled, but public and academic pressure persists. Next, I'll be talking about India, FPTP in a vast and diverse democracy. India used FPTP for elections to the Lok Sabha, also known as the lower house of parliament. The system's simplicity is a logistical advantage in a country with over 900 million eligible voters. However, India's extraordinary religious, ethics and linguistic diversity presents serious challenge for FPTP. A 2022 study by the Indian Public Policy Review notes that FPTP often exacerbates underrepresentation of minorities and enable dominant parties to win outsized majorities with limited vote share. Example, in the 2014, the BJP secured a majority with just 31% of the popular votes, a typical FPTP outcome. The system also fosters regionalism, where states-based parties dominate locally but are excluded federally. Next, New Zealand, a case of successful reform. New Zealand used FPTP until early 1990s. Concern about unrepresentative parliaments led to two referenda in 1992 and also 1993, after which the country adopted mixed-member proportional (MMP) representation. Under mixed-member proportional, voters cast two votes, one for constituency (MP) and one for political party. The final seats allocated in adjust to reflect the party vote proportionally. This has led to more accurate representation of smaller parties, women, and Maori candidates. Teresa Asano highlighted that while MMP increased coalition governments, it enhanced legitimacy and inclusivity. While in 2022, Jay Farrer adds that MMP boosts public confidence in election fairness and voters turnout rose accordingly. Now I will be discussing about is the UK typical or exceptional. When viewed alongside Canada, India and Malaysia, the UK experience with FPTP appears fairly typical. The system delivers strong governments but struggles with fairness and representation. However, New Zealand's reform shows that the transition to proportional representation can work in a Westminster-style system. The UK stands out in that it has seen persistent reform debates but little action. In contrast, New Zealand acted decisively and Canada at least opened serious national discussion. The UK is therefore typical in its challenge, but increasingly exceptional it is in its resistance to reform. Thank you.
Next, I will start my part about the suggestion of the first past the post system. Before I dive into the suggestion of reform, there is a serious issue to discuss. Why is the reform important? In 2024, general election in the UK exposed the drawback in first past the post system. Labour Party won over 63 of seats with only 33.7% of the vote, one of the largest vote slip gap in UK history. This highlights how first past the post often fails to reflect public opinion fairly. Moreover, it creates safe seats, encourages tactical voting and contributes to low turnout rate. There are several suggestions of the reformation of the first past the post system. One possible is the additional member system, which is currently being used in Scotland and Wales. Under the additional member system, each voter has two votes. The first is used to vote for a named candidate for a geographically defined single member, and the second vote is to use to elect an additional member. This vote is cast for a political party or an independent candidate. Under this hybrid system, voters cast two votes, one for a local constituency MP and a second for a political party. The goal is to maintain the traditional single-member constituency system while also correcting the overall result to reflect proportional support for each party so that it is fair to every party. To do this, additional MPs are elected from regional party lists, effectively topping up underrepresented parties based on their share of the second vote. We can already see additional member system in action in Scotland. Voters elect 73 MPs from the Westminster-style first ballot paper and 56 from the second ballot paper. The Westminster-style ballot paper are counted first, and the candidate with the most votes in the constituency wins, even if the majority of people didn't vote for them. The second ballot papers are then counted. The people counting look at how many seats a party won on the first ballot paper. Then they add additional members from the party list to make parliament match how the country vote on the second ballot paper. So basically, if a party has 5 MPs from the constituencies and its fair share is 8 MPs, then 3 candidates from its list become MPs. This is either done in regions as in Scotland or Wales, or countrywide as in New Zealand. Voter choice is manifestly enhanced by the ability of electors under this system to cast their two votes in different political directions and thus to escape from the dilemma outlined earlier that under first past the post system. They have either to subordinate their view of who is the individual candidate best for the constituency to their choice of government for the country, or vice versa. In short, the additional member system offered a balanced compromise retaining familiarity for voters while making elections more proportional. Second, the use of rank or majority voting such as the alternative vote would make sure each MP has over 50% of support. This reduces tactical voting as voters can rank their true preference without fear or wasting their time. Under the current first past the post system, it's a common thing that the candidates win lesser than 50% of the vote, especially when multiple parties are competing. This often encourages tactical voting, where voters choose the lesser evil rather than their true preference, simply to block an undesirable candidate. For a reformation of system for this issue, the alternative vote system can be used. In this system, voters rank candidates in order of preference. If no one gains over 50% of the vote on the first count, the lowest ranked candidate is counted eliminated and their votes are redistributed based on their second preference. This process continues until a single candidate secures a majority of 50% of the votes. This system enhances parliamentary representation by ensuring that all representatives have the support of at least a majority of their constituents and require candidates to appeal to a wide cross-section of voters rather than to just a narrow segment of the electorate. They also argue that it encourages political moderation as extremist political parties will rarely be a second or third choice among most voters, and that it will discourage tactical voting in favor of voters, expressing their sincere intention. Ultimately, major-based voting could lead to more representative outcomes and help restore public trust in the democratic process. This ensures that members of parliament are elected with broader support from their constituencies as they must appeal not only to their base but also to those who might rank them second or third.
Churchill famously remarked that democracy is the worst form of government except for all others that have been tried. This sentiment captures the UK's pragmatic acceptance of an imperfect system such as first past the post. First past the post often faces a lot of criticism due to its disproportionality and marginalisation of smaller parties. Nevertheless, it's also praised for its ability to create clear outcomes, a stable majority government, and in context, first past the post is considered to be the least bad option. This is particularly highlighted in regions where political stability and a need for decisiveness is prioritised. However, the structural limitations of first past the post raise serious questions about its democratic legitimacy. The system often produces distorted outcomes, such as majority governments formed without public support, thereby undermining the core democratic principle of equal representation. Although proportional representation systems aim to fix these problems by making the number of seats match the share of votes more fairly, they can lead to unstable governments and slow decision making because they often require multiple parties to form coalitions. This trade-off highlights the dilemma that Churchill alluded to. No electoral system is flawless, but first past the post might still be considered the least bad option in the context where government stability and decisiveness are valued over representation and fairness. A pragmatic balancing act between the competing goals of political stability and electoral fairness shaped Harold Wilson's approach to electoral reform. As Prime Minister, Wilson expressed scepticism towards the proportional representation, fearing it would undermine the effectiveness of governments by producing unstable coalitions and legislative deadlock. His preference for the first-past-the-post system reflected a belief that strong majority governments were essential for policy-making, especially during the times of economic and political uncertainty. However, the prioritisation of stability came at a democratic cost, as first-past-the-post regularly delivered results that misrepresented voter intention and excluded smaller parties. Wilson's stance can therefore be critiqued for perpetuating a system that favoured party dominance over representational inclusiveness. Scholar Bliss have similarly noted that while first past the post provides stability, it often does at the cost of representative fairness, raising doubt about whether such stability can be democratically justified in long term. Thus, while Wilson's preference for stability was politically expedient, it arguably failed to address deeper issues of democratic fairness, illustrating the enduring tension between stability and fairness in politics and in the Constitution. The debate whether the UK should prioritise governability or proportional representation strikes at the heart of competing democratic values, efficiency versus fairness. The current first-past-the-post system has historically favoured governability by producing single-party majorities, which allows for decisive and stable governments. However, critics argue that this comes at a significant democratic cost, as first-past-the-post often distorts the translation of votes to seats, marginalise smaller parties, and leaving large segments of electorates unrepresented. In contrast, the PR system offers an equitable reflection of popular votes and tends to foster a broader spectrum of political voices in Parliament, which many scholars see as enhancing democratic legitimacy. Yet, PR can also lead to coalition governments, which may struggle with a legislative gridlock and policy compromise, potentially undermining the efficiency of governments. The UK context presents a unique tension. While governability ensures political stability, continued reliance on first-past-the-post risks alienating citizens who feel like their votes don't count anymore. Therefore, a critical evaluation suggests a hybrid system, such as additional member systems used in Scotland, may offer a pragmatic middle ground, balancing effective governance and fair representation. Ultimately, the governability is essential. It should not be pursued at the expense of democratic legitimacy, suggests that greater proportionality deserves more serious consideration in the UK's electoral future.
For the longest time, the UK political system was based on the first-past-the-post voting method. This is praised for its straightforward approach, quick results, and efficiency in assisting a single party to establish majority rule. This allows for stable leadership and a better connection between citizens and their local representatives. In fact, Pippa Norris, in her book Electoral Engineering, elaborates how majoritarian systems, such as FPTP, are engineered to produce strong single-party governments with clear accountability structures. However, it still generates significant issues because the true demands of the people are not completely conveyed. This method permits a party to win a majority of seats without receiving a majority of the national vote. This leads to unequal outcomes, with some votes being wasted and smaller parties being barred from the parliament. Aaron Leiphardt's pattern of democracy critically shows how FPTP frequently results in unequal representation and exaggerates bigger parties' parliamentary dominance, often at the expense of smaller ones. It encourages the dominance of only two main parties while limiting a broader diversity of political representation. Other countries have come to terms with the exact same issue in various ways. For example, as previously stated, New Zealand converted from FPTP to Mixed Member Proportional (MMP), which produced more balanced outcomes based on the actual proportions of votes each party receives. While Canada, India, and Malaysia continue to employ FPTP, they confront similar issues with fairness and sufficient representation. In mixed member electoral systems, Matthew Schugert and Martin Wattenberg discuss how hybrid systems seek to incorporate the best features of both models. In short, FPTP provides strong, stable government, but it struggles to ensure fairness, reform dependence, or whether a country values stability or fairness more. Thank you.